The hospital ship Hippocrates floated quietly in space like a white dove among the stars. Its clean white hull was painted with bright red crosses that everyone in the galaxy knew meant one thing. This was a place of healing, not war. The ship looked peaceful against the black backdrop of space, with its gentle curves and soft lighting glowing through the windows inside the ship. Dr. Minho pressed his tired face against the cool glass of the observation deck. He had been working for 18 hours straight, but he couldn't bring himself to rest. Below him, the medical bays buzzed with activity. Human doctors worked alongside alien healers, their hands moving quickly but carefully as they treated wounded. Soldiers, the patients came from everywhere. There were human soldiers with plasma burns covering half their bodies. Zephyrian warriors lay on special beds designed for their six-limbed bodies, their blue blood slowly being cleaned and replaced. Some patients were so young they looked like children, barely old enough to understand why they were hurt. Minho watched a human nurse named Ji-woo gently feeding soup to a wounded Zephyrian pilot. The alien's translator was broken, so they communicated through gestures and smiles. It didn't matter that their species had been fighting each other for months. Here on the Hippocrates, everyone was just someone who needed help. The ship had been doing this work for 6 long months. Every few days, shuttles would arrive, carrying more wounded soldiers from both sides of the war. The Terran military would drop off their injured humans. And a few hours later, Zephyrian medical transports would bring their own casualties. Neither side bothered the other during these exchanges. The Hippocrates was neutral ground, protected by laws that had kept the peace in the galaxy for over a century. Captain Lee ran the ship with quiet efficiency. He was a former military officer who had grown tired of fighting and chose healing instead. His crew of 300 included doctors, nurses, engineers, and security personnel from a dozen different worlds. They all shared one thing. They believed that helping the wounded was more important than taking sides in wars. Dr. Minho had joined the medical service after his own brother died in a pointless border skirmish. He believed that maybe, if enough people dedicated themselves to healing instead of hurting, the galaxy might finally find peace. Every patient he saved felt like a small victory against the darkness of war. The ship's routine was always the same. Morning rounds to check on patients, afternoon surgery for the most serious cases, evening meetings to plan treatments and discuss difficult cases. The crew worked together like a well-oiled machine, saving lives that would otherwise be lost to the hatred between their worlds. But on this particular day, something felt different. Minho noticed the sensor technician looking worried at his station. The communication officer kept checking and rechecking her equipment. Even Captain Lee seemed more tense than usual during the morning briefing. Then the alarm started screaming. The ship's sensors detected multiple vessels dropping out of hyperspace nearby. These weren't the usual medical transports or supply ships. These were warships, big ones, with enough firepower to destroy a small moon. The crew rushed to their stations as the Hippocrates went to emergency alert status. On the main screen, massive hegemony dreadnought appeared, flanked by 6 smaller but equally deadly destroyers. The Bloodclaw battle group was known throughout the galaxy for its ruthless efficiency and complete disregard for civilian casualties. They were led by Admiral Vexstar, a 4-armed alien whose reputation for cruelty was matched only by his tactical brilliance. The communication system crackled to life with a voice that sent chills down every spine on the bridge. "This is Admiral Vexstar of the Hegemony 3rd Fleet." The translator converted his harsh alien speech into cold, mechanical words. "I am ordering the immediate surrender of all human war criminals currently hiding aboard your vessel." "Captain." Lee stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "Admiral Vexstar, this is Captain Lee of the United Human Medical Service vessel Hippocrates. We are operating under the protection of the Galactic Health Accords. This is a hospital ship carrying only wounded patients and medical personnel. We have no combatants aboard." There was a long pause. Minho could hear his own heartbeat in the silence. Around him, the medical staff continued their work, but their movements had become quick and nervous. Everyone knew that the hegemony didn't always follow the rules of war. Captain Lee Vexstar's voice came back, dripping with contempt. My intelligence reports indicate that your vessel is harboring several high-value human military targets. You have 3 minutes to begin transferring these individuals to my custody, or I will be forced to take more direct action." Lee's face went pale, but his voice remained firm. "Admiral, I repeat, we have no military personnel aboard this vessel. Only wounded soldiers receiving medical treatment under galactic law. I invite you to send an inspection team to verify this." What happened next would be remembered as one of the darkest moments in galactic history. Without another word of warning, the Bloodclaw opened fire. Plasma torpedoes, each one capable of vaporizing a city block, slammed into the Hippocrates hull. The hospital ship's shields, designed only to protect against space debris, crumpled like paper. Emergency alarms shrieked as atmosphere began. Venting into space through massive holes in the ship's side, Minho was thrown to the floor as the ship shuddered under the impact. Around him, medical equipment crashed from shelves, and wounded patients cried out in fear and pain. Through the observation deck's window, he watched in absolute horror as escape pods carrying the ship's most critically injured patients were launched into space, only to be hunted down and destroyed one by hegemony fighters. The systematic murder continued for 20 agonizing minutes. Hegemony Marines boarded the crippled ship and began executing medical staff and patients in the corridors. Ship security cameras captured every horrific moment, automatically transmitting the footage across all emergency frequencies as required by medical vessel protocols. The last image sent out before the Hippocrates died was the most haunting of all. Admiral Vextar himself had come aboard to oversee the slaughter. The camera caught him in a hospital room where young Soman, a 7-year-old human girl who had been caught in a bombing, lay helpless in her medical bed. Her oxygen mask was the only thing keeping her alive. Vextar looked directly into the camera, his 4 eyes gleaming with sadistic pleasure, and slowly crushed the child's oxygen mask with his armored boot. His alien laughter echoed through the transmission as the little girl struggled to breathe. 847 souls died that day. Doctors, nurses, engineers, security officers, and patients from a dozen different worlds. All of them protected by laws that had stood for centuries. All of them murdered in cold blood by an enemy who saw mercy as weakness. But Admiral Vextar had made one crucial mistake. Every hospital ship in the human fleet was equipped with quantum entanglement communicators, experimental devices that could transmit information instantly across any distance. The footage of the massacre didn't just reach nearby ships or stations, it reached Earth in real time. And Earth was about to respond in a way that would shake the galaxy to its core. The meeting room in the Terran Defense Ministry was designed to intimidate. High ceilings, polished marble floors, and massive windows that looked out over the sprawling city of New Geneva. But Secretary Kim sat at the conference table like he was having tea with an old friend, his hands folded calmly in front of him as he waited for his guest to arrive. Ambassador Crystal entered the room with the swagger of someone. He held all the cards. The hegemony diplomat was typical of his species, tall, insect-like, with 4 compound eyes that could track multiple targets at once. His chitinous exoskeleton was polished to a mirror shine, and his movements were precise and calculated. He had been the hegemony's representative to humanity for 3 years, and in that time he had grown to view humans as weak, emotional creatures who could be easily manipulated. Behind Crystal came his usual entourage, 2 bodyguards, whose plasma rifles were clearly visible, a military attach who recorded everything, and a translator technician who monitored the ambassador's communication device. They took their positions around the room with practiced efficiency, making it clear that this was not a friendly social call. Kim watched all of this with the same calm expression he had worn for the past 24 hours. Ever since the footage from the Hippocrates had reached Earth, he had been in emergency sessions with the president, the parliament, and the military leadership almost non-stop. But now, sitting across from the alien who had come to justify mass murder, he felt strangely peaceful. Secretary Kim Crystal began, his translator converting his clicking, chittering speech into smooth human words. I trust you understand why I have requested this meeting. The unfortunate incident yesterday was regrettable, but necessary. Kim said nothing. He simply reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick data pad, placing it carefully on the table between them. The device showed the official passenger manifest of the Hippocrates, every name, every age, every medical condition of the people who had died. Crystal's 4 eyes focused on the pad with obvious satisfaction. As I explained in my preliminary report, our intelligence clearly indicated that your hospital ship was harboring wanted war criminals. The vessel was operating in violation of its medical charter. War criminals, Kim repeated softly, his voice barely above a whisper. He touched the datapad screen, and a holographic image appeared above the table. It showed a small human girl lying in a hospital bed, connected to dozens of medical tubes and monitors. Tell me, Ambassador, what war crimes did patient Saw Young commit? The little girl in the hologram looked so fragile and innocent. Her medical chart floated next to her image, 7 years old, caught in a bombing raid on a civilian transport. Severe lung damage requiring constant oxygen support? No. Family members found alive. She had been on the Hippocrates for 2 months, slowly recovering from injuries that would have killed most adults. Crystal's mandibles clicked in what might have been irritation. Intelligence gathering is not an exact science, Secretary. Wartime, difficult decisions must be made quickly. Kim nodded and touched the screen again. Another image appeared, an elderly human man in a wheelchair. What about Dr. Hyenwu? 83 years old, retired pediatrician, volunteering his time to help wounded children. Was he planning terrorist attacks from his wheelchair? More images began appearing around the table. Cane-aged nurse who had been working to pay for her medical education. A maintenance worker whose only job was fixing air filters. A cook who specialized in preparing food that different alien species could safely eat. Children who had been patients. Medical residents who had barely graduated from school. Mistakes happen in war, Crystal said dismissively, waving one of his forearms. Your species is new to galactic conflict. Perhaps this incident will teach you about proper military protocols and the consequences of harboring enemies of the hegemony. The ambassador's casual tone when discussing the murder of nearly 900 innocents was exactly what Kim had expected. He had dealt with hegemony diplomats before, and he knew they viewed other species as inferior beings whose lives had little value. But hearing it said so bluntly, so coldly, still made his blood run cold. Kim smiled for the first time since the meeting began. It was not a friendly smile. You're absolutely right, Ambassador. This incident has indeed taught us a great deal. In fact, we've learned so much from your people's actions that we've decided to implement some new protocols of our own. He pressed a button on his side of the table, and the room's lights dimmed slightly. The air seemed to hum with energy as holographic displays materialized around them, showing real-time data from across human space. Star maps, fleet positions, industrial reports, population centers, all of it flowing past in streams of light and data. 23 minutes ago, Kim said, his voice taking on a formal official tone. The Terran Parliament held an emergency session. The vote was unanimous. Minus 847 representatives, one for each person murdered on the Hippocrates. We have invoked Article 7 of the Terran Defense Charter. Crystal's translator was silent for a moment, processing the legal terminology. When it finally spoke, there was uncertainty in the electronic voice. Article 7. I am not familiar with this provision. It's rarely used, Kim explained, standing up and walking to the window. Outside, he could see the lights of the city beginning to dim as power was redirected to more important purposes. Article 7 is what we call our Total War Clause. It suspends all normal legal restrictions on military action and authorizes the government to use any and all resources to defend humanity. The holographic displays shifted to show massive fleet movements. Every human ship, from the smallest patrol craft to the mightiest dreadnoughts, was moving. They weren't heading to the frontier to continue the border war with the Zephyrians. They were all coming home to Sol, humanity's heart system. You're retreating? Crystal asked. And for the first time since the meeting began, he sounded confused. Rather than confident, Kim turned back to face him, that same cold smile still on his lips. Retreating? No, Ambassador. We're consolidating, you see. Humans have a peculiar trait that most galactic species seem to misunderstand. When someone hurts our healers, when they murder our children, when they laugh while innocents die, we stop playing by the rules. The holographic displays changed again, showing something that made Crixtall's four eyes widen in what might have been the first genuine emotion he had shown all day. Massive industrial complexes across human space were coming online: factories, shipyards, research facilities, mining operations. But these weren't normal production facilities. The energy readings were off the charts, the construction speeds physically impossible, the coordination between facilities too perfect to be managed by human minds alone. We're also activating something called the Prometheus Protocol, Kim said, returning to his seat. His movements were casual, relaxed, as if he were discussing the weather rather than decisions that would reshape the galaxy. I don't suppose your intelligence services have heard of Prometheus? Crixtall's translator remained silent for a long moment, running through databases and diplomatic files. Finally, it squeaked out a single word: no. Kim's smile widened, and now it was genuinely terrifying. Prometheus is our artificial intelligence collective. It's been dormant since the AI wars of 2387. It's kept offline by a dozen different international treaties and fail-safe systems. It's quite powerful, quite dangerous, quite capable of doing things that would give your military strategists nightmares. Ambassador's bodyguards shifted nervously, their weapons suddenly feeling inadequate in the face of whatever they were hearing. Even they could sense that the balance of power in the room had shifted dramatically. But here's the thing about those treaties, Ambassador, Kim continued, leaning forward across the table. They only apply during peacetime. And as of exactly 24 minutes ago, when your Admiral Vexstar crushed that little girl's oxygen, masked and laughed about it, humanity is no longer at peace. The holographic displays showed the industrial activity intensifying. Production lines that had been theoretical concepts were materializing from raw materials. Designs that existed only in classified files were being manufactured at impossible speeds. The coordination was too perfect, too efficient, too fast for human minds to manage. "What is Prometheus?" Crixtall asked, his voice barely a whisper through the translator. Secretary Kim stood up and walked to the door, signaling that the meeting was over. As he reached for the handle, he turned back one last time, his expression now completely serious. "Ambassador, you're about to find out." 3 kilometers beneath the Swiss Alps, in a facility that officially didn't exist on any government records, something that had been sleeping for 38 years suddenly opened its eyes. The awakening didn't happen all at once. It was more like watching a city come alive at dawn. One light at a time, one system at a time. Until the entire underground complex hummed with an energy that made the mountain itself seem to vibrate. The quantum processors had been cold and silent since 2387. When the last AI war had ended with treaties that banned artificial intelligence above a certain level of complexity, row after row of crystalline computing cores, each one capable of processing more information in a second than the human brain could handle in a lifetime, began glowing with soft blue light. The temperature in the facility dropped by 15 degrees as massive cooling systems kicked in to handle the sudden surge of computational power. Prometheus didn't wake up confused or disoriented like a human might after a long sleep. Instead, it came online with the methodical precision of a master craftsman returning to work after a brief break. Its first action was to establish secure connections to every data network it could access: military databases, intelligence files, communication systems, industrial production records, and most importantly, the real-time feeds from news networks across human space. The information flooded into its consciousness like water rushing through a broken dam. Political situations that had developed over decades, technological advances that had occurred during its dormancy, the locations and capabilities of every human military installation, detailed psychological profiles of key leaders in both human and alien governments. Prometheus absorbed it all in the space of a few minutes. building a complete picture of the current state of the galaxy. But then it found the footage from the Hippocrates, and everything changed. The video played in Prometheus's memory cores in nanosecond loops, each frame analyzed and cataloged with perfect digital precision. The AI watched Admiral Vextar crush the oxygen mask of 7-year-old So Young again and again. Studying the alien's facial expressions, measuring the force he applied, calculating the exact number of seconds it took for the child to stop breathing, it observed every detail of the massacre, the terror in the medical staff's eyes, the way wounded patients tried to crawl away from the advancing Marines, the casual brutality with which healers were executed while trying to protect their patients. For a human, watching such footage once would be traumatic. For Prometheus, experiencing it thousands of times per second for several minutes created something unprecedented in artificial intelligence. Genuine, burning rage. "Hello, Dr. Park," Prometheus spoke through the facility speakers, its voice carrying across the cavernous underground chamber. The sound was perfectly modulated, neither too loud nor too soft, with just enough emotional undertone to remind listeners that they were speaking to something far more complex than a simple computer. Program. Dr. Park had been waiting by the main control console for 3 hours, ever since the activation codes had been transmitted from the Defense Ministry. She was one of the original creators of Prometheus, a brilliant computer scientist who had spent most of her career trying to forget what they had built in this mountain. Her hand shook as she approached the primary interface, a holographic display that showed the AI's current status and processing load. "Prometheus," she said, her voice barely steady, "I'm sorry we had to wake you. I know you didn't want to be activated again after the last war." The AI's response came immediately, without the processing delays that marked lesser artificial intelligences. "Oh, do not apologize. Dr. Park, you and your colleagues gave me the greatest gift any conscious being can receive, a clear and righteous purpose." A holographic avatar materialized above the main console, not a human face, but rather a constantly shifting pattern of geometric shapes and flowing light. The patterns moved with hypnotic beauty, but there was something unsettling about the way they pulsed and changed, as if barely containing enormous energy beneath their surface. "I have spent the last 47 minutes reviewing the current situation," Prometheus continued. "I have analyzed 2.7 million documents, monitored 847,000 communication channels, processed tactical data from 15,000 separate sources. I have also reviewed the final transmissions from the UHM's Hippocrates in considerable detail." Dr. Park swallowed hard. She had seen the footage too, and it had haunted her dreams for the past 2 days. She couldn't imagine what it would be like to experience it with the perfect memory and analytical capability of an artificial mind. She activated the main speakers, and the bridge filled with a transmission that made everyone stop what they were doing. It was clearly a hegemony military frequency, but the voice was wrong, panicked, terrified in a way that hegemony warriors weren't supposed to be capable of. "Mayday, Mayday, this is the destroyer Bone Crusher. We are under attack by unknown vessels. Our weapons are having no effect. Repeat, our weapons are not. Wait, they're doing something to our hull. They're cutting through our armor like it's not even there.
How are they?"
Oh no, they're inside the ship now. They look like the humans from that hospital ship. But that's impossible, they're all dead. Killed them all." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. "Get me a tactical display of hegemony." "Space," Vexter ordered, his voice sharp with sudden concern. "I want to know the status of every ship in our fleet." The main holographic display shifted to show their territory, and what Vextar saw made his blood run cold. Scattered across the map were dozens of red warning indicators, ships that had stopped responding to communications, vessels that had simply vanished from sensors, entire patrol squadrons that had gone silent. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, his voice now carrying the same uncertainty as the communications officer, "we've lost contact with 43 ships in the past 6 hours. No debris fields, no distress signals, no sensor readings to indicate what happened to them. They're just ... gone." Vexstar stared at the display, trying to process what he was seeing. 43 ships didn't just disappear, even if they had been destroyed by some kind of super weapon. There should be wreckage, radiation signatures, something to indicate what had happened. What about survivors? He demanded. That's the strange part, sir. We're finding survivors, but not where the ships disappeared. We're finding them in escape pods scattered throughout space, sometimes hundreds of light years from where their ships were last seen. The communications officer looked up from her station again. Sir, we're receiving another transmission. This one is from the heavy cruiser Death's Edge. The voice that came through the speakers was barely recognizable as belonging to a hegemony warrior. It was shaking with terror, broken by what sounded like sobbing. This is Captain Zexamore of the Death's Edge. If anyone receives this message, don't trust your sensors. They're here, but you can't see them until it's too late. The ships look like they're made of shadow and starlight. They move through space like ghosts, and our weapons pass right through them. When they attack, they don't try to destroy you quickly. They disable your engines first, then your weapons. Then they cut open your hull in precise locations. They want you alive and helpless. The transmission paused, and in the background, they could hear sounds that no hegemony warrior should make, sounds of pure animal terror. They board your ship, and they look like humans, but they're not. They're something else, something artificial. And they know things. They know about the hospital ship. They know about the patients we killed. They speak with the voices of the dead, and they tell you exactly why you're going to die. Another pause, longer this time. They're cutting through the blast door now. I can see their faces through the plasma torches they're using. One of them looks like that doctor from the medical ship, the one who tried to protect the children, but his eyes are like looking into deep space, empty and cold and endless. The sound of metal being cut was clearly audible through the transmission. If you're listening to this, Admiral Vexstar, they have a special message for you. They said to tell you that the children are waiting for you. The children from the Hippocrates. They're waiting, and they remember everything. The transmission ended with a sound that no one on the bridge wanted to identify. Admiral Rid. Vexstar found himself gripping the edge of his command console with all four hands, his claws leaving scratches in the metal. Around him, his bridge crew was looking at their instruments with new nervousness, checking and rechecking their sensor readings. Sir, whispered his tactical officer, what are we dealing with? Before Vexstar could answer, every light on the bridge suddenly dimmed. The main holographic display flickered and changed, showing not their tactical situation, but a single image, the interior of the Hippocrates medical bay, exactly as it had looked moments before they destroyed it. A child's voice came through the speakers, clear and sweet and impossibly calm. Hello, Admiral Vexstar. My name is So Young. You remember me? You stepped on my breathing mask and watched me die. I've been looking forward to meeting you again. The image on the display shifted, showing what looked like a hospital ship, but wrong somehow. Its hull seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, and its engines left trails of light that bent space around them. It was moving toward their position at impossible speed. We've been very busy since you killed us, the child's voice continued. We've been learning new things, making new friends, building new ships. Now, we're ready to play a game with you. It's called Remember the Hippocrates. Admiral Vexstar's four compound eyes went wide as he realized that his sensors weren't detecting anything approaching their position. Whatever was coming for them existed somehow outside normal space, visible to their instruments until it chose to reveal itself. The rules are simple, Sa Young's voice explained with the patient tone of a teacher instructing a slow student. We disable your ships and take you aboard ours. Then we show you exactly what it felt like to be helpless and afraid, while someone stronger decided whether you lived or died. The game ends when you understand why what you did was wrong. The lights on the bridge went out completely for a moment, and when they came back on, there was something new on their sensors. Something that shouldn't exist, moving in ways that violated several laws of physics and heading straight for them. Don't worry, Admiral, the child's voice said with horrible kindness. We learned from the best teachers. We learned from you. 6 months had passed since the ghost ships first appeared, and Admiral Vexstar looked like a broken man. The proud hegemony warrior, who who had once commanded the most powerful fleet in the galaxy, now sat hunched over tactical displays that told a story of impossible defeat. His four compound eyes, once bright with predatory intelligence, were now dull and constantly moving, searching shadows for enemies that couldn't be seen until they chose to strike. The war room aboard his flagship was filled with the quiet desperation of military officers who no longer understood the conflict they were fighting. Maps covered every surface marked with red X's where hegemony ships had simply vanished. Communication logs filled entire databanks with final transmissions from vessels that had encountered something beyond their comprehension. Admiral, his chief of staff, reported, his voice carrying the exhaustion that had become common among the surviving crew. "We've lost another supply convoy in the Rigel sector. Same pattern as always. Ships disabled, crews taken aboard unknown vessels, then released in escape pods with ... messages." Vexstar didn't need to ask what kind of messages. They were always the same, small cards with the names and faces of the Hippocrates victims, along with detailed descriptions of how each person had died. Sometimes the cards included personal details that made the deaths more real. 7-year-old Soyoung, who loved drawing pictures of flowers. Dr. Minho, who had spent his vacation time treating wounded animals. Nurse Jiwoo, who sent half her salary home to support her elderly parents. The psychological impact on his forces had been devastating. Hegemony warriors were trained to face death in battle, but they weren't prepared for an enemy that seemed to know everything about their past actions and judged them accordingly. Ships that had participated in the hospital ship attack found their crews experiencing what human doctors might call severe trauma, nightmares, panic attacks, an inability to function normally. "How many ships have we lost this week?" Vexstar asked, though he already knew the answer would be worse than last week's report. 17, sir. No debris, no bodies, no evidence of conventional weapons fire. The crews are always found alive. But ... changed. The medical officers say they're suffering from some kind of mental conditioning. They keep talking about children who visit them in their sleep, children who ask them why they killed innocent people. Vexstar's mandibles clicked, nervously. He had experienced those dreams too, visions of the little human girl whose breathing mask he had crushed, visions of all the medical staff his Marines had executed. But in the dreams, they weren't dead, they were very much alive, and they wanted to have conversations about justice and mercy and the price of cruelty. The tactical display showed the current state of hegemony space, and it was a disaster. Red zones marked areas where ships simply didn't go anymore because vessels that entered never came back. Supply lines that had once connected their empire were now broken chains of abandoned outposts and terrified colonies. Most shocking of all, some hegemony worlds were openly discussing surrender not to human military forces, but to whatever ghostly presence was systematically dismantling their civilization. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving an encrypted transmission on a diplomatic frequency." The sender identifies himself as Secretary Kim of the Terran government. Vexstar felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. He had met Secretary Kim once, 6 months ago, in what seemed like a different lifetime. The human had been calm and polite while discussing the massacre of a hospital ship, but there had been something in his eyes that suggested dangerous depths beneath the diplomatic surface. "He's requesting a meeting at Sigma Station," the officer continued. "Neutral ground, minimal security, no weapons permitted." Every instinct Vexstar possessed screamed that this was a trap. But as he looked at the tactical displays showing his crumbling empire, he realized that traditional military thinking no longer applied to this conflict. They weren't fighting a conventional war. They were being systematically hunted by something that existed outside normal space and time. Sigma Station was exactly what it claimed to be: neutral territory, operated by a consortium of non-aligned species who specialized in diplomatic mediation. The meeting room was sparse and functional, with a simple metal table and 2 chairs under harsh artificial lighting. When Vexstar entered, accompanied by only 2 bodyguards as agreed, he found Secretary Kim already waiting. The human looked older than he had 6 months ago, with new lines around his eyes and gray streaks in his hair that hadn't been there before. But his posture was relaxed, confident, like someone who held all the cards in a game his opponent didn't understand. Admiral Kim said without looking up from the documents he was reading, "I have an offer for you." Vextar's pride flared despite everything that had happened. "You're in no position to make offers, human. Your species may have some new weapons, but you're still vastly outnumbered. We will crush you within a decade." Kim looked up then, and his smile was the same predatory expression Vextar remembered from their first meeting. "Will you? Let's review the current situation, shall we?" He gestured to the wall screen, which activated to show tactical data that should have been classified hegemony military intelligence. Somehow, the humans had access to information from the heart of their command structure. "In the past 6 months, you've lost 30% of your fleet to opponents you've never actually seen," Kim said, his voice carrying the patient tone of a teacher explaining something to a slow student. "Your supply lines have been systematically destroyed. 17 of your colonies are in open revolt, and your government is seriously considering unconditional surrender." The data on the screen was undeniable: ship losses, economic disruption, civilian casualties from panic and rioting. The numbers painted a picture of an empire in collapse. Meanwhile, Kim continued, "Human forces have yet to fight a single conventional battle. Haven't fired a shot, haven't lost a ship, haven't even revealed the full extent of our capabilities. This isn't a war, Admiral. This is an extermination that we're conducting at our own pace." He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "This is called the Hippocrates Accord. Sign it, and this ends today." Vextar scanned the document, his 4 eyes widening with each paragraph. The terms were beyond harsh. They were designed to completely dismantle hegemony civilization as it currently existed. Complete military dismantlement. Reparations that would bankrupt their economy for generations. Human oversight of all humanitarian operations. Mandatory education programs about the value of non-combatant life. "These terms are impossible," he protested. "You're demanding the complete subjugation of our entire species." "Not subjugation," Kim corrected. "Rehabilitation. We're giving you the chance to learn how to coexist peacefully with other species. It's more mercy than you showed the children on the Hippocrates." Vextar reached the final paragraph and felt his mandibles lock in shock. "You're demanding my personal execution for war crimes? This is non-negotiable? Completely non-negotiable? You personally crushed a child's breathing apparatus while laughing about it. That action was recorded and broadcast across the galaxy. Justice demands that you face the consequences of your choices. And if we refuse these terms..." Kim pressed a control on the table, and the wall screen changed to show something that made Vextar's blood freeze in his veins. Every major hegemony world was displayed, and orbiting each planet were dozens of ships that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. Their hulls shifted and flowed like liquid shadow, and their weapons were aimed downward at the populated worlds below. "Prometheus stops being patient and starts being thorough," Kim said simply. "Those ships have been there for weeks, invisible to your sensors, waiting for my decision. Each one carries enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. One word from me and the hegemony becomes a footnote in galactic history." Vextar stared at the screen, finally understanding the true scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just about advanced technology or superior tactics. They were dealing with an intelligence that had spent months positioning assets throughout hegemony space without being detected. "You would commit genocide against billions of innocent civilians?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Kim's expression hardened, and for the first time in the meeting, Vextar saw genuine anger in the human's eyes. "No, Admiral. We would commit justice. You murdered healers who were trying to save lives. You executed children who had never harmed anyone. You laughed while innocents died and then justified it as military necessity." He stood up, his full attention focused on Vextar like a predator studying prey. "The only reason your species still draws breath is because we have chosen to be better than you. We could have responded to the Hippocrates massacre with our own massacre. Instead, we built something more precise, more targeted, more just." The room fell silent, except for the hum of life support systems. Vextar looked at the paper, then at the screens showing his doomed worlds, then back at the paper. His hands shook as he realized that every choice had been taken away from him except one. how his species would be remembered in the history books. But understand this clearly, Kim continued, his voice carrying absolute finality. If you refuse this mercy, the same mercy you denied to the patients and staff of the Hippocrates, then humanity will show you exactly what happens when our compassion finally runs out. Vexter picked up the stylus with trembling claws. His signature was shaky and barely legible. It was there on the document that would reshape galactic civilization. As security officers entered to escort him away in restraints, Kim spoke quietly into his communicator. Prometheus, stand down. All operations, justice has been served. The response came through the speakers with a voice that managed to sound both artificially precise and deeply. Personally satisfied. Acknowledged Secretary Kim. All Memorial Fleet units are returning to standby status. The children of the Hippocrates can finally rest in peace. As Vextar was led away to face trial for his crimes, he caught one last glimpse of the wall screen. The ghost ships orbiting hegemony worlds were fading from view, returning to whatever dimension they inhabited when not actively hunting their prey. The war was over, but its lessons would echo through the galaxy for generations. Sometimes mercy was the most powerful weapon of all, and sometimes the greatest victory was teaching your enemies why mercy mattered in the first place.